So, with all of this focus on enforcing immigration during the Obama administration and the increased criminalization of illegal immigrants, you're going to see more and more of them entering into detention centers. Okay, in fact, there is a mandatory quota, so at least 35,000 undocumented immigrants have to be detained in these detention centers in order to receive federal funding. And so that's an incentive to increase the criminalization of undocumented workers, right? And this costs $5 million a day, right? To detain these undocumented immigrants in these detention centers. And so that's a lot of money going towards these detention centers, right? And it's not safe in a lot of these detention centers either. There's been reports and complaints of abuse that is happening in these centers, right? There has been reports of rape and sexual abuse happening in these detention centers. So they're not safe places for undocumented immigrants. And so $5 million a day, that is a lot of money. And so where is it going? Right? Well, some of these detention centers are ran by the federal government, but many of them, over half of them, are private prisons. Okay? And that means private companies are making money by getting these federal contracts. And so they're detaining these undocumented immigrants and making a huge profit off of it. And so you would have these private prisons lobbying the federal government to continue its policy of criminalizing undocumented immigrants. They're getting paid off of it, right? And so they don't want to see the decriminalization of undocumented immigrants. They want them to be criminalized so that they can continue to make this huge profit off of this, all right? But eventually, you would see a federal judge in California by the name of Dolly M.G. She would rule that it was unlawful to detain child immigrants in these detention centers longer than 3 weeks. Okay, and so that would put limitations on how long children could be detained, right? But this becomes an issue, right? The fact that children are being detained in the first place, because you're going to see a number of children being separated from their families. This started during the Obama era, but it increased even more so during the Trump administration, where children are being separated from their parents. And put in these detention centers, right? And many times these children would not be able to get back in contact with their parents, and they'd be permanently separated, or for a long period of time they'd be separated from their parents, right? And so that becomes a major issue, and you're going to get a lot of criticism against this practice later on. In 2013, you would see a large protest in Washington, D.C. The protest, a march called Camino Americana. So you would see a number of protesters going to D.C. And trying to push for some type of immigration reform. Because remember, right now, you have a lot of these executive orders coming from Obama, but you don't see a reform policy being passed by Congress, right? And so in this march, you would actually have some members of Congress taking part who were trying to push for Congress to pass some type of immigration reform. The issue of immigration would get even more publicity with the arrival of a number of Central American migrants, many of them children, in 2013 and 2014. Okay, and so you would see a large amount of children coming from Central America, some of them without their parents, and some of them with their mothers, but they were coming to the United States because they were trying to escape really harsh living conditions in their home countries, right? And so you had problems of gang violence, which put their lives at risk in their home countries, as well as extreme poverty, okay? And so these were refugees, right? Refugees trying to find asylum in the United States. And so how did the United States react to this wave of child migrants coming from Central America? Well, basically, they detained them and tried to deport them. Okay, so you see the establishment of a number of new detention centers, and these children were put in these detention centers for a period of time. But that ruling by Judge G had an effect on how long they could be in these detention centers. And one of the issues surrounding this was the fact that many of these children, these Central American migrants, didn't have any type of legal representation. Right? And so they were going to these immigration courts and they had to pretty much defend themselves. So they're helpless, and so they're going to get deported, right? And so many of these migrants who didn't have representation were sent to Texas and California. In California, there was a bill passed, a Senate bill, SB 873, and this bill allowed for funding that would go to lawyers who could represent these child immigrants in immigration court. All right, so that would help them because you have a much better chance of not getting deported and getting asylum if you have some type of legal representation. All right. You'd also see on the federal level President Obama establishing CAM, the Central American Minors Refugee Parole Program. And this program allowed for children migrants whose parents were legally in the United States to remain in the U.S. As refugees or parolees, right? And so their parents don't have to be U.S. citizens, but if they are legal residents, or even if they've just been deferred, right? If their deportation has been deferred and they can stay in the U.S. for a period of time, then their children can stay in the United States. Okay, so that's CAM. A couple years later, starting in 2017 and really kicking off in 2018, you'd see another series of migrants, child migrants, coming to the United States, and these are the caravans. And so the caravans coming from places like Honduras, and also El Salvador, Guatemala. You would see a number of children coming, as well as with their mothers sometimes, but some of them just coming by themselves on that long, dangerous trip, coming to the United States and trying to get asylum. And many of them would be denied. Again, you would see them being put in detention centers, and this becomes a major issue for the Trump administration. Right, a lot of criticism coming from the detainment of child migrants. All right, and so you have a large amount of migrants coming from Central America, and this brings the issue of immigration again into the spotlight. And so the United States is still dealing with this issue. Still trying to deal with the caravans coming from Central America, still dealing with the issue of DACA and trying to pass the DREAM Act. So these are ongoing issues at this time.